Max Verstappen did what Max Verstappen does best. He stole the spotlight with a pole lap so razor thin, it practically sliced Lando Norris's hopes in half. Just 0.012 seconds separated them. Oscar Piastri was right there too, in third. The top of the grid was a showcase of precision, nerve, and control. It was a thriller of a qualifying. But step a little further down the pit lane, and things looked very different. And if you're Yuki Tsunoda, driving your first qualifying session in Red Bull colors, at your home Grand Prix no less, you're probably asking, what the hell just happened? For Yuki Tsunoda, the Japanese Grand Prix was supposed to be the beginning of something massive. He finally had the car, the badge, the backing of Red Bull Racing, and to make things even sweeter, it was all happening at Suzuka, a place where every corner echoes with the legacy of legends, and every grandstand was filled with fans ready to erupt at the sight of their hometown hero in a top-tier seat. And for a moment, it looked like that dream was starting to take shape. In FP1, Tsunoda turned heads by going 6th fastest, just a 10th behind Verstappen. That's not just decent for a debut, that's headline-worthy. Even the most skeptical fans had to pause and raise an eyebrow. The narrative was writing itself. Tsunoda, the underdog promoted to the big leagues, holding his own against the reigning king of the grid. A Japanese driver in a Red Bull car, performing on home soil. What more could you want? But F1 weekends aren't made of dreams. They're made of data, pressure, unpredictability, and the occasional brush fire. Literally, FP2 descended into chaos, with red flags from Jack Doohan's crash, Alonso's gravel excursion, and even parts of the track catching fire. So while the session gave little to no meaningful track time, the mood surrounding Yuki was still cautiously optimistic. After all, the flashes of pace were there, and even in that disrupted environment, he managed to soak up valuable feedback on the car. Heading into qualifying, expectations weren't sky high, but there was a sense that Tsunoda could pull something off. And in Q1, he did. He was quick, confident, sharp. He slid through to Q2 in 7th place, only 0.024 seconds off Verstappen on his second run. Think about that. Less than half a tenth behind the fastest driver in the world in the same car. At this point, the dream wasn't just alive, it had teeth. But then came Q2, and that's where the fairy tale turned into something closer to a horror film with no budget. Things began unraveling before the lap even really started. On his final flying attempt, Tsunoda had a slight wobble exiting the chicane that disrupted his rhythm. Then, as he turned into turn 2, a sudden gust of wind, yes, a gust of wind, threw the balance off, causing a snap of oversteer and pushing him wide. He fought the car, regained control, and pressed on. But in F1, those kinds of moments are fatal to lap times, especially in a car like the RB21, where performance hinges on microscopic precision. His lap improved, but only marginally, just 0.154 seconds better than his first Q2 effort, and ironically, slower than his best lap from Q1. He missed out on Q3 by just over 0.2. The difference between progress and elimination, in this case, was less than the blink of an eye. The garage fell silent, the grandstands too. Now, on paper, P15 looks like a bad day, but it feels even worse when the man you replaced, Liam Lawson, qualifies ahead of you. Especially when he's in a Racing Bulls car that, in theory, shouldn't be anywhere near a Red Bull on pure performance. And yet, there he was, one spot ahead. A gentle reminder that in F1, the past isn't just behind you, it's often in your mirrors, breathing down your neck. What makes it sting even more is the context of that qualifying session. Tsunoda had shown pace. He had been in the fight, but the Red Bull RB21 is not your average car. It's not plug and play, it's not forgiving. In Tsunoda's own words, it was more tricky than the simulator had led him to believe. The difference, he said, was a bit more exaggerated in the real car, and that's a polite way of saying, this thing is trying to kill me. Even more telling was his remark about tire warm-up. He admitted that he missed the window for the second run in Q2 completely, and in this car, tire warm-up isn't just important, It's everything. The RB21, as Max himself has hinted before, only performs when every single parameter is in perfect harmony. It's like trying to play a symphony on an out-of-tune violin, blindfolded in front of a sold-out crowd. You either nail it or get booed off stage. So yes, Tsunoda made mistakes, but they weren't the kind of mistakes born from lack of talent. They were the mistakes of someone still sinking with a car that punishes even the smallest misstep. A car that, when driven by Max, looks unbeatable, but when driven by literally anyone else, becomes a riddle wrapped in carbon fiber. And yet, even after all that, Tsunoda didn't point fingers. He didn't lash out. He owned it. He said he learned something even if it was too late. He said he now understands the car better. That's not defeatism. That's the mindset of a driver who still believes he can tame the beast. But for the crowd at Suzuka, and for Tsunoda himself, the heartbreak of Saturday afternoon will linger a little longer than most. Because this wasn't just another qualifying session. It was the beginning of something that was supposed to be unforgettable. And it was, for all the wrong reasons. Tsunoda didn't blame the car outright, but he also didn't hide the fact that it wasn't behaving the way he expected. In the simulator, the RB21 didn't feel crazy tricky, but once rubber met asphalt at Suzuka, it was a different story entirely. A little more than I expected in terms of car feeling, he said. That might sound polite, but for a driver who just got promoted into the hottest seat in Formula One, it's the equivalent of screaming into a pillow. Tsunoda also pointed out the narrow operational window of the RB21. He talked about how the tire warm-up had to be almost perfect for the car to come alive. That's not just an observation, it's a warning sign. If your car only works when you hit a microscopic target in a constantly shifting environment, it's not a racing car. It's a diva with grip issues. And then came the telling remark. He said after Q2, it felt like he'd read the whole textbook on how the RB21 works. Now, depending on how generous you're feeling, you can interpret that in two ways. One, he's made a breakthrough and now understands what the car needs. Or, two, he's just realized how convoluted, complex, and punishing this machine really is. Either way, there was no celebration in his tone, just resignation. This wasn't a learning moment, it was a reality check. There's also the point that he stuck with the higher downforce setup that Red Bull was experimenting with, unlike Verstappen, who shifted direction in FP3. Why? Maybe it was a gamble. Maybe it was a miscommunication. Or maybe it was Tsunoda trying to make the car work the way he wanted it to, rather than bending to its will like Max so often does. I feel like this car is on the edge with the rear, he said. And when a Formula One driver says on the edge, what they usually mean is, I am one corner away from needing a new set of pants. That's not confidence. That's survival mode, and that kind of driving, it doesn't win you podiums. It just wears you down. Now, let's talk accountability, because anytime a driver underdelivers, the knives come out. Was Tsunoda simply not good enough on the day? Did he buckle under pressure? Or are we looking at a deeper, car-shaped problem? It's easy to point at the scoreboard and go, well, Liam Lawson qualified ahead of him. Sure, but Liam's not in the same car. He's in a Racing Bulls machine that, despite being objectively slower, seems a lot easier to handle. It's like comparing someone riding a wild stallion to someone cruising on a steady bicycle. The stallion might be faster, if you can stay on it. What we saw in Suzuka wasn't Yuki crumbling. It was Yuki being introduced to the real Red Bull racing experience. Not the one you see on the podium, the one that exists behind Verstappen's extraordinary talent. Because make no mistake, this car doesn't make you fast. It punishes you until you either adapt or implode. Even in quarter one, Tsunoda was just fractions off Verstappen. That's not a fluke, that's raw pace. But as the grip faded, the tire temps wobbled and the wind picked up, that margin became a chasm. Why? Because the RB21 has no forgiveness built into it. It demands perfection, and even then, it often sneers at you for trying. So is Yuki to blame? Not entirely. Did he make mistakes? Of course. But the RB21 wasn't helping him. It was working against him, turning every minor error into a massive time loss. A gust of wind shouldn't derail a flying lap. A slightly mistimed tire warm-up shouldn't destroy your session. But that's where we are. And the scary part? This isn't new. Let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't the first time we've seen talented drivers struggle in a Red Bull seat. Tsunoda isn't an isolated case. He's just the latest episode in a painfully familiar series. The title? How Red Bull Breaks Young Drivers Without Really Trying. Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon. Even Sergio Perez has had moments where the RB machine looked less like a race car and more like a career trap, and every single time, the common denominator has been, Max is fine, Max thrives, Max wins. So clearly, the car can work, but if you take Max out of the equation, what is Red Bull really? That's the uncomfortable question no one at Milton Keynes likes to answer. Because the truth is, Red Bull's dominance has been so thoroughly defined by Verstappen's brilliance, it's become almost impossible to separate car from driver. The RB21, much like its predecessors, is a machine built around Max's instincts, Max's style, Max's feel for chaos. It rewards his inputs, but anyone else? Good luck. It's like buying a custom-made suit tailored to someone else's body and being surprised when it doesn't fit, and then blaming the person wearing it. In a way, Max is the perfect mask. His consistent excellence hides the flaws in the machinery. His wins make the car look like the best on the grid, but under the surface, Red Bull is running on a razor-thin margin of usability. For anyone not named Verstappen, that's not a system. That's a gamble disguised as dominance. So when Tsunoda struggles, or Lawson gets chopped, or Perez has a race weekend that looks more like a haunted house tour, it's not just on them. It's the pattern, it's the car, it's the system, and unless something changes, Yuki's dream debut might be just the beginning of another Red Bull story we've seen way too many times.